Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 26 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian for 12 years and counting, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful school library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that the ideas expressed in this podcast are my own, or when appropriate, I always cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I would like to say a special hello and thank you to several listeners who reached out this week. Catherine in Connecticut and Melissa in Sydney, Australia, who listens to this podcast on her way to work. And on a purely coincidental note, this week I purchased some Australian currency to give to my daughter. She's finishing her second year at the University of Michigan's nursing school and is vacationing in Australia before her summer job starts at the university hospital. Some may dispute this, but I happen to believe that Australian currency is the prettiest money I have ever seen. I actually had to show it to some of the customers in line at the bank. I will say right now that the U.S. Mint could take a hint and update our own currency. Anyway, as a reminder, when emailing the podcast at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com or messaging me on Facebook or Twitter, please consider including a mailing address, and I will be sure to include a sticker. This podcast is being recorded on March 31st, and it is a noteworthy day on my calendar. It is my podcast's 1-year anniversary. 1 year ago, I made the decision to create this podcast. In the weeks leading up to March 31st, I had only invested my time in School Librarians United. On March 31st, 2018, I took the definitive step of creating a Gmail account, selecting a media host, sharing the artwork, picking music, and perhaps most importantly, declaring out loud to those in my family of my intention to create my own podcast. All of these things made this venture very real, and I would spend the next few months developing my ideas, researching, and getting feedback from those closest to me. Today, exactly 1 year later, I'm recording my 26th episode. I have listeners across the United States and in 24 countries around the world. Welcome, Nepal. Now I cannot stop thinking of a school library in the Himalayas. Anyway, this podcast is evolving, and I can credit the listeners for that. I am truly grateful for your feedback, your encouragement, and especially for being a part of this listening community. And now, the topic for today's episode, Book Bounty Hunter, the worst job ever. Anyone who knows me knows I am not a confrontational person. I can't stand having awkward or unpleasant conversations. Regardless of who you are, I will do just about anything to dodge an uncomfortable situation. Suffice it to say, dealing with lost and ruined library books is hands down the worst part of my job. I hate every minute of it, and I know I'm not alone. We all have stories to tell because our commitment to our libraries is an emotional one. For perhaps the first time since recording my earliest episodes in the fall on weeding and discarding and purchasing, I'm tackling an issue which pertains to all libraries and all librarians, not just school, but especially public libraries, and they've been addressing this challenge far longer than we ever have. As a former high school social studies teacher, I can't help but include a related presidential anecdote. And according to an article written by Ed Pilkington for The Guardian on April 17, 2010, I'll attach a link in the show notes, President George Washington checked 2 books out of the New York Society Library on October 5, 1789. Quote, the ledger simply referred to the borrower as President in quill pen and had no return date, end quote. What especially caught my eye was the statement by head librarian Mark Bartlett, quote, we're not actively pursuing the overdue fines, but we would be very happy if we were able to get the books back, end quote. Isn't this the exact sentiment felt by every librarian? It has never been about the money. We really just want our books back so others can enjoy them. Another related story happened 10 years ago. Minutes after departing LaGuardia Airport, Captain Sully Sullenberger of the U.S. Airways Flight 1549 conducted a successful emergency landing on the Hudson River, saving all 155 passengers aboard. Investigations revealed a large bird struck one of the engines. It was revealed shortly thereafter that Captain Sully had a library book in the hold of the plane, interlibrary loaned from California State University, Fresno, through his public library in Danville. When Captain Sully contacted the library for an extension and a waiver of the overdue fees as the book was trapped in the hold, not only did the library waive all fees, the replacement copy now bears a dedication to Captain Sully. Coincidentally, the book was on professional ethics. Do we ever waive book fees? Absolutely. I can think of many circumstances in which a school and the librarian has decided to remove the library books from the patron records. But those are the exceptions, not standard practice. Under most circumstances, when books are borrowed, it is fair to expect that they will be returned. Increasingly, libraries across the United States are being encouraged to not only waive overdue fees, but offer windows of amnesty during which all library materials can be returned without question or penalty. According to a February 2016 article in the Smithsonian, a link will be provided in today's show notes, quoting Nancy Martinez, the Lodi Public Library Service Director, quote, "We want our books back, and even more, we want our borrowers back." Bridget Doyle, writing for the Chicago Tribune, described when the Chicago Public Library had a 3-week amnesty for all materials in 2012. I'll attach a link in the show notes. 101,301 items were returned, valued at over $2 million. While $600,000 in fines were waived, the likelihood of any of that amount being recovered is unknown, but the upside of such a gesture is obvious. In addition to recovering the once lost items, your patrons will now feel welcome in the library again. Furthermore, your circulation statistics will increase. When public and school libraries are dependent on taxes for much of our funding, our utility to our community must be apparent. I'm aware that libraries in the neighborhood charge 5 cents or 10 cents per day. However, as Ruth Graham, writing for Slate.com on February 6, 2017, said, pertaining to fines, quote, "One user's nominal is another's exorbitant. Too many families decide it's safer not to use the library at all," end quote. I'll have a link in the show notes. Said one of the public library system CEOs, Patrick Lozinski, quote, "We've shut off access to the library when one of our staunchest principles is to provide the widest access to materials we can. We just felt fines ultimately were counter to the overall purpose and vision of our library," end quote. I know this to be true of our local libraries because I've asked. Collecting fines makes up less than 1% of the library's source of income. On one point of this article, however, I will draw an important distinction, and that is of teaching responsibility. Author Ruth Graham asked, quote, "Fines imply that a library's mission is not only to encourage reading, but to perform a kind of moral instruction. Does it make sense for libraries to perform both of these jobs?" End quote. Her article concludes no, but I would say when speaking about school libraries, the answer is yes. Our elementary libraries have never charged late fees, but we still incorporate a great deal of instruction on responsibility when we check books out to our students. This week on Facebook, there was a posting about sharing our "Library is closed" signs, and I feel like we all fall into one of two camps. Those of us who can lock our doors and close the library, and those of us whose building configuration means, regardless if we have adequate staffing or not, our libraries are always physically open. I've worked in libraries which can and do get locked whenever a staff leaves for lunch. I've worked in libraries where, because the library houses the only staff restroom and the laminating machine, this remains a constant thoroughfare being traversed by every staff member throughout the day. I've seen libraries through which a corridor connecting one half of the school to the other half of the school runs through it. meaning half of the student body crisscrosses every time recess ends and lunch begins. Like many school libraries, 2 of my libraries house the offices of the school social worker and the school psychologist. I visited libraries which, thanks to the open design of schools which were built in the 1970s, have no actual walls whatsoever, and whose perimeter is delineated by an inward-facing bookshelves. Many of us can't close our libraries, and when you can lock up your collection, remember that our libraries are all being used after school for activities such as homework help, scouting, PTO meetings, Board of Education meetings, yoga club, extended childcare like Kids Club. And this has to do with not just building design, but building use as well. And here's the challenge as it relates to losing books left and right. One of the contributing factors to books walking away and consequently being marked as missing in our catalog is because no one is minding the store. Our libraries are communal spaces, and with that comes inherent risk of loss. Imagine telling a business that they can't afford to lose any inventory, and, oh, by the way, the doors will remain opened and unlocked all day and all night. The topic of lost books and how to recover those lost books is one that isn't easily answered. In fact, one of the possible episode titles I had been tossing around was No Easy Answers, because in many respects, we can publish policies and we can say, this is how we address lost books. But the reality is that we abandon much of that in the face of incidents, and we have to address them on a case-by-case basis. What I can conclude, based on various Facebook groups, is that we all have adopted policies which reflect a combination of our school's past practice, the administration's input, and our own scheduling and ability to track down missing books. And it's not just the loss of the books, it's the loss of our time. Tracking down lost books and the fees for ruined books is extremely time-consuming. Emailing individual parents, following up with teachers, and if you get your money back, then you still have to order the books again, have them shipped and processed. As was pointed out in one of the earlier articles cited, it is also the loss of readers. Students who are concerned about losing a book, or perhaps have already had to pay for one that was damaged while in their care, may decide to stop checking books out altogether. And when that happens to students who are only 6 or 7 years old, it is very difficult to help them understand that there is a way to check out books and make sure that it doesn't happen again. I am aware that school librarians should be sensitive to families' financial circumstances or any issues that perhaps families are grappling with, like health crises. However, it has been my experience that oftentimes school librarians aren't privy to that information or nearly aware as, say, the classroom teacher is. The sheer numbers of knowing an entire building student body, worse, when we have to cover multiple buildings. For example, I cover 27 classes in 4 different buildings. I average about 650 or more students each year. Am I going to know the details affecting a student's ability to pay for a ruined book? I usually have to go to the teacher before I reach out in a parent email. What should I know before I contact this parent? Teachers can be great in giving you some suggestions about which parent you should contact, or if there's extenuating circumstances, which you should be aware of before you walk into a situation without appreciating all of the factors which might be affecting this child's ability to return a book on time. Please forgive me, because what I'm about to say will sound, at the very least, unpopular, but it might also come across as being rather heartless. The phrase, "I'd rather lose a book than lose a reader," is one that I have heard often, too often. It looks good as a meme, will get tons of retweets, and it sounds good in a keynote. You'll get lots of nodding heads. But the reality is my collection suffers, my budget suffers, and my readers left wanting to read the books that are ones who really miss out. Yes, I can replace a lost book, sure, but not immediately. When my budget is spent, which happens much faster than I like, I have to wait till the next school year to get another budget. which is why I don't just say, "That's okay, the student probably needed the book more than the library did." Libraries don't function like that. The reality is that when books get checked out and, from time to time, are lost or ruined beyond repair, I can't just wave my magic wand, pluck some money off the money tree that's growing in my back office, and let bygones be bygones. We school librarians have an obligation to try to recoup the losses when students ruin or lose library books. It is an obligation we have to the taxpayers who support our schools, to the PTO who fund many of our purchases. We are the stewards of our program. We are the authorized purchasing agents who work on behalf of something much bigger than just one person. And here is another issue. If textbooks don't get returned, the district doesn't just give up and say, "That's okay." Instructional tools like technology isn't just written off as, "Oh, well, the student needed it more than we did." School instruments must get returned. I became a band parent in 2011, and I will continue to be a band parent until 2020. 2 of my kids play instruments, and I have become very aware of the school-imposed fees for rentals and uniform cleaning fees. Each year, I sign a form agreeing to pay for any pieces of lost marching band equipment uniform, from the little plume on the hat to the spats. I know how much a concert bow tie and cummerbund cost because the replacement fees are in the band and orchestra handbook. Sports are no different. So why are library books considered disposable? Why do parents question the necessity to pay for a lost or ruined library book? Why do some of our administrators instruct us to waive the lost books and absorb those costs into our budget? Because our shelves are lined with books already? Because what's 1 or 12 missing every year? This is going to sound like I'm trying to make money off of my students. No, it's about loss prevention. The ridiculous stories are the ones we remember the most. Our school generates the public library cards for all of our young 5s and kindergartners and new district transfer students. At one point, we realized one of our kindergartners had accrued $467 in fines from the public library. One of the students' missing titles was Doctoral Dissertations for Dummies. Today, that 5th grader still has about $162 of fines on his card, and the only books he's allowed to check out are from our library. Late May, many years ago, we were frantically trying to get all the books returned before the end of the school year, and one of my students informed me that she was not going to pay for the 3 library books she couldn't find because her dad told her that they were moving to a new school district and it didn't matter. We have schools of choice in our neighborhood, and parents can shop around for the district they like. Other school districts require residency. So this student left the end of the school year with $55 on her record. Guess who showed up to school in September? Guess who still had $55 of fines on her record? Is this obnoxious? It most certainly is, and I resent having to spend time fighting this battle. I had a rather memorable conversation with a parent in maybe my 1st or 2nd year as a librarian, and I explained that she needed to pay for the book that her child had lost. She said to me, and I think she was being serious, "Don't each of the students get a freebie?" I was speechless, and that in and of itself is a very rare thing to happen. And I cannot remember if I was attempting to stifle laughter or outrage or the expletives which I wanted to hurl at this woman. But in the calmest voice I could muster, I explained to her that with 560 students, we could not possibly give each student a freebie, as it would result in 560 of the newest, most popular titles walking away from our collection with no consequences whatsoever. One challenge which persists are students who insist they can replace one book with one they found online for much less. A bill will go home, oftentimes for a ruined book or a lost book, and a parent emails me that their student will be delivering a replacement as soon as the Amazon box arrives. This never ends well. Mind you, Every single correspondence home from the library regarding ruined and lost books says, "Please pay cash," repeated brightly in red ink. And in a recent example, a hardcover book was lost, and it was priced at $14.95 on the bill. The student brought back a paperback copy with the, quote, "used/in good condition" label still on it. It's likely the parents paid $2 to $3 and figured, a book is a book. We learned the hard way that begrudgingly processing a replacement book purchased by parents comes with its own peril. A parent delivered 2 paperbacks for the hardcovers her son had lost. Not wanting to pick a fight, I decided to just be fine with the paperback replacements. No sooner had I stamped these books with our school name and address, processed the books with barcodes and spine labels, all made by hand, of course, did the lost books turn up. The boy showed up to the library asking for the donated books back. When I explained to him that I had processed them so we could circulate those books, he said he didn't want those books and that the library should pay his mom for the books she had provided as replacements. I explained that the library only refunded money when money is paid for books, and he could have his choice of which books he took, my library copies or his now processed paperbacks. In the end, I got my books back. But imagine the time that this entire fiasco took me. Imagine how that time could have been better spent. And what happens when the principal steps in and offers to pay for a damaged book? And this child is 5 years old. What happens the next time he loses a book? What happens the next time and the next time? It's not a sustainable solution. And what happens when a ruined book gets past you and it gets checked back in? I was straightening our cookbook section during the first week of September before we'd even started student checkout, and I came across a cover which felt a little sticky. When I inspected the book, every single page had fused together. I can imagine a juice box explosion. Somebody attempted to clean the cover off and get it back into the system. No harm, right? I could see who was the last student to have checked a book out and returned it in May. I couldn't recoup the loss, but I did confront the student. I explained that from now on, whenever the student checked a book out, it would be checked back in very carefully. And unfortunately, I've had to scrutinize those returns ever since. I have had students return books minus all the spine labels and barcodes. The student then had the audacity to tell me that it was like that when I checked it out to the student. Another student brought book back in 2 pieces, the pages in one hand and the spine and covers still attached on the other hand, and then had the gall to suggest that I had checked out the book like that. Like many school librarians, I encouraged kids to keep their library books in their lockers, in their classrooms, their book bin, or their desk. Quote, "My parents aren't allowed to check out because I had to pay for my library book last year," is something I really hate to hear, but I'm going to try to find a solution that works for everybody. So where does that leave us? Our school year begins with book care lessons for every grade. When I talk about the trust that the library has when students are going to be responsible for the books they take home, I often use a scenario that the students will understand. Your cousin asks to borrow the brand new video game you got for your birthday and brings it back in pieces after it was dropped in the driveway and the car drove over it. You want to see the kids fired up? Use that example. The students and I talk about good choices and bad choices. We play a game of thumbs up and thumbs down and about consistently keeping library books in a special place, away from their puppies and their little siblings. What are you doing to get your overdues back? I always let teachers know how much I appreciate their reminders. Some teachers are better than others about reminding families, and this is especially evident in the younger grades, and it is especially important to schools who have like an A, B, C, D, or a similar rotation. My students have to remember which day is library day. Is it A day or B day? It's a lot harder than trying to remember if your library day is on a Monday or a Tuesday. Some teachers have decided to keep their library books in the classroom. This has had some mixed results because when library books go missing, the parents refuse to pay for a book because it never came home. I did come across a really interesting lost book policy on social media, and I asked Shonda, a Texas middle school librarian, if she would share it. In it, it says, any book that is overdue for more than 60 days will automatically be marked lost. Students will then be charged a lost book fee. The student will be responsible for paying the replacement cost. There are 3 options to pay for a lost book. 1, pay by cash or check. 2, pay with canned goods. 1 can equals $1 off lost book fee. Students may bring cans of unexpired food to be donated to a local food pantry. We will only accept non-perishable canned goods. Or option number 3, pay with time. 30 minutes of reading equals $1 off lost book fee. Students can read books and to earn their time, and there are specific guidelines for this option. To see the librarian for details, and students may also combine any of the above options to pay the replacement cost. I want to thank Shauna for sharing that with me. I did find a similar program described in the Queen's Library in Auvergne, New York. This program encouraged patrons up to the age of 21 the option to read with or to younger children, which could earn both of them credit towards any accrued library fees. I appreciate these solutions as they encourage students to read rather than discouraging them from checking out books at all. I have included 2 items in the show notes for you to use. These are intended for younger students. The Yikes document is a half-page I've used, albeit not consistently, but it asks the students to think about where their missing library book might be, and they can check the different boxes and look when they get home. Recognizing that more than half of my students have multiple homes, a mom's house, a dad's house, means many of them don't know which house they'll be in on the day their library books are due. The other resource is a scrolling marquee of fun library messages, which always gets an audience. I've included both the marquee URL, which will automatically start and scroll endlessly. I've also included the Google slide, which you can modify for your own library. When you're ready to create a scrolling marquee, drop down under the File tab and Publish to Web. You'll have the options of how long you'd like each slide to show. I use 3 to 5 seconds, and then bookmark the URL for easy access during your checkouts. I like to have the marquee rolling when classes arrive, and the messages are echoed as students, especially the young ones, like to read them out loud. Again, this topic of lost and ruined library books doesn't come with easy answers. I encourage you to revisit this issue of lost and ruined books with fellow librarians in real life and through social media. What works for some libraries won't work for others. The reality of the eventuality of lost books and the impact on our collection and our budget means all of us have had to address this thorny issue in the way that works best for our libraries and our school. I would like to thank you for listening today. The topic of our next episode draws its inspiration from the Game of Thrones. The episode is not about Game of Thrones, and you don't need to have ever seen the show to enjoy next week's episode. We in this house are devoted fans, and while I've only read the series once, I am married to someone who's an even bigger fan of the books and the HBO series. There are 2 people on this planet with unfinished business, and I forbid them to die. And one of them is George R.R. Martin, who owes his readers the last 2 books in this series. And for that reason, I wanted to let you know that my goal is to record on Sunday in the afternoon rather than late at night when Game of Thrones is on. Laugh if you want, we all have our vices. Unless I can think of a better title for next weekend, the working title for April 8th is I've Learned That I Still Have a Lot to Learn. I hope you will tune in.